We're going to talk about the elements of art now. These are some tricks that you can use when you're creating an artwork, in particular in photography, things that you can think about as you're taking your pictures to help make each picture unique. If you can keep these elements of art in mind as you're looking at the world around you, you can try to emphasize some of those elements by how you frame a shot, what you're including in it and what you're not including in it, and really make pictures stand out, make them unique. These are the 7 different elements of art. On this slide, this is the definition. We're going to think of the elements of art being the building blocks of all art. So when we're looking at any artwork, whether it be a photograph or a painting or a drawing or a sculpture, we can look at the artwork and notice these different elements of art. We'll be able to talk about them and use them to describe the artwork, so that if somebody was even not able to see the artwork, they could begin to imagine how it would look by using these vocabulary words. The principles of design is in Learning Target 10, and these are the way that we put the elements of art together to make an artwork more interesting. So there's elements of art, which are kind of the building blocks. So if you think of like Lego pieces that are put together to create a set, elements of art are those smaller pieces. The way that we put those pieces together is the principles of design. All of our eyes work differently. So while some of you may look at a picture and you might notice one thing, others may notice something else. That's the great thing about art, is there's no one right answer, no one right way to do things and for how to look. So when you're looking at a photograph, I want you to think about the way that you see it and the way that you're understanding how it's viewed and what makes it interesting to you. So some people may think that the color of this photograph down here, how it's all kind of on a muted green tone and has a different value, maybe that's the most interesting thing to you when you're looking at it. Some of you might think line is really interesting because your eyes are moving along with the railroad tracks. So again, each of you can see things differently, and that's great. Our first element of art is something called line. It's the most basic element. It's a continuous mark made on the surface, like a drawing or anything that might be mark making, or it could also be the edge of an object. So when we're looking at these picture examples down here, we have a wide variety of lines. Some of them are person-made, like these lines that are on the ground here. Others might be natural lines, like the things that you find in nature, like trees or clouds, the edge of the clouds, a horizon line. Okay, lines are all around us, and you can't really have something exist without having a line because it's the edge of an object. The way that you use line can create different moods in a picture, kind of like color can affect the mood of a picture. So if you have flat lines, for example, that are real horizontal, you might create more of a calming effect. People feel stable when they're looking at it. Whereas something like a zigzag line is really chaotic, and people's eyes begin to move and follow that line around. Here's some line examples. You could think about what types of lines you're noticing in them, out of the variety of lines that were described in the previous slide. Our next element of art is something called value. This is the range from light to dark in a photograph. So you could have dark value or you could have light value and everything in between. When we're editing a picture, generally we're looking for creating a good range of value. So if we're using levels or curves when we're editing, we're going to try to create a photograph that has a rich tone to it and has good contrast. So a difference between light and dark. So these are 2 different pictures, one in black and white, which really emphasizes value, makes us notice that value. And in here we have a color photograph, monochromatic, all kind of on the green side of things. And we've got a range of light to dark within that as well. It's tints and shades added in with the color. Here's some good examples of value being used. The light is coming from behind in both of these images. One to create a silhouette, and another that just creates an interesting view on a leaf where we can notice some of the texture more by having that light from behind. Our next element of art is something called color. Color is created when light bounces off of something, and our eyes read that light in different colors. It can be used to vary the mood or feel in an artwork. So, for example, you might look up something called the psychology of color and think about how when you're photographing something, depending on its color, you can create this different mood based on that. For example, red can be more on an angry side of things. Yellow and greens, and even some of these blues, can be more calming. There are three things that are built into color, and it's called hue, intensity, and value. Hue is the name of a color, intensity is how strong that color is, and value, which we learned on our previous slide, is how light or dark something could be, adding tints and shades. Color schemes are ways that color can be used to certain effects within an artwork. These are different things that artists and designers have been using for thousands of years to make it so that things look like they go well together. These are three basic color schemes. There's hundreds of color schemes out there, but these are three that would be important for you to know. Complementary colors are colors that are opposite of each other on the color wheel. Here's a little mini version of that color wheel from the last slide that creates a lot more contrast when you're using colors that are on opposite sides of the color wheel. Lots of sports teams will use jerseys that have complementary colors going on, so that way the players on the field can be noticed better. For example, we've got Minnesota Wild with red and green. We have the Minnesota Vikings with purple and yellow. And you can kind of look at a lot of different teams and notice how they're using complementary colors in that way. Analogous colors are using three colors that are right next to each other on the color wheel. Doesn't matter what three, as long as they're all right next to each other. Monochromatic is using one color as your main color in the image, and then you've got tints and shades of that color. Here are some different picture examples. Right here we've got complementary colors being used with that red, the violet there and the yellow. And then we have analogous colors being used on the bird. Shape is two-dimensional. Now, generally when we're photographing something, it's going to have some kind of dimensionality to it because it exists. But you might think about shape showing up as things that are on the surface of an object that we're photographing, or sometimes the way that we're taking the picture. We can notice the shapes that are created, like circles, squares, triangles, things like that. When you do a silhouette, you begin to make it so we just notice the edges of the object rather than its three-dimensionality, and that's a great way to make a shape really show up in a picture. Also, when we're photographing architecture, the sides of buildings, the fence here, for example, that's a really great use of shape. The next one's called form. Form is three-dimensionality. So when we're photographing something, if we see the sides of it, if we see the value of the shadows on that object, we're going to start noticing the form. We're going to see how it really stands out. So form, here's some examples. When we're photographing something from the side, at an angle like this, we begin to see how it stands out. Whereas if you photograph straight down on something like a keyboard, it would look a little bit more like shapes because we're seeing the squares. Here's an example of a photograph that I think shows a little bit more shape because it's exactly from the side for these two fish and directly from the front of this fish. So again, we notice the edges more and the shape that it creates. But here, an example of the bananas from the side. Good lighting really shows the value. That's more showing form. Space is the amount of space or area that something takes up and the amount of area or space that it is not taking up in a picture. Positive space is the object or the subject itself. Negative space is the area that's around it. You can use space in an interesting way by how you frame something when you're taking a picture. So for example, you might have something photographed where there's a lot of area around it. Like on this slide here, so much area around this boat. Again, positive space is the boat, negative space is the space around it. This is an example of a photograph that I think is not doing space very well. When I look at it, the person looks like they've got an upwards movement, with the way that they kicked the football, and they're way too close to the top edge of the frame. It just seems a little bit off balance for me, and kind of really bugs me. So you can use space to your advantage, or you can use it to your disadvantage when you're taking a picture, based on how you're looking through the frame and how you make things look. So try to have a good balance of positive or negative, or have one really overshadow the other, and you can use space that way. Texture refers to the surface quality or feel of an object. So when we're looking at an image of something, we could really notice how detailed the edges of that thing is. Or, for example, the wall, we've noticed how rough it would look like and how it would feel. And these cups, how smooth they are, and the reflections that occur in them. That's really using texture in an interesting way. When you switch over to macro photography and you're getting close in on something, that's another great way that you can show texture. These are the elements of art, and I want you to think about how, when you're taking pictures, how you could try to emphasize one of these elements of art or more in the pictures that you take.